Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here for the book launch of OMAR Shahid Hamid's sixth novel, The Election. Can everyone hear me at the back? I don't know if, yeah. So this is an interesting book, largely because it's a powerful indictment of our times. Very much a reflection on elections, as the title suggests, but also it reflects what populism is all about. It draws a comparison between Pakistan and its experience with populism and America's experience with populism, something we've all seen just in these past few weeks. So the first thing I want to ask you, Omar, is first off, you're not a prisoner to introductions. Excuse the pun on prisoner, which was your first novel. You have to press the.
It's working.
So I'm not going to give you an introduction. Everybody knows what you've done and your terrific work. What drew you towards political satire? Because you've written police fiction, you've written the first cohesive work of police fiction that Pakistan has ever seen in English. And you went into counterterrorism writing, and there was a spy thriller somewhere in the middle. And now we're veering away from your comfort zone, getting into political satire. Tell me something about that.
Thanks, Taha. So the genesis of this book comes from a news clip. A few years ago, at that time, I think PTI ki government thi, there was coverage that I happened to watch on TV of, I think, Imran Khan's visit to the US. I think this was the only one time that he was hosted by President Trump. And as I was watching the visuals of that visit, what struck me was that these were two kind of people who were icons of the 1980s. They both had reputations as playboys, and sort of they lived in this life of celebrity. So neither of them was a pure politician. And now they were sort of having this meeting, and what I wouldn't have given to have been a fly on the wall when they had a one-to-one, because I'm pretty sure that it had nothing to do with politics or strategic policy or anything. Probably had to do with perhaps women that both of them may have dated simultaneously in the 1980s.
Possibly,
And I just thought that to take that as a premise and to then discuss this issue of the rise of populism around the world, and which is why the book takes so half the book is based in the US around the US election cycle, and half the book is based around the rise of a populist leader in Pakistan. And just to compare and contrast, the times that we live in are so crazy that I remember, so when I was pitching the book first to my agent, I said, yeah, this is the thing, and XYZ. And she turned around, she's English, she was English, and she said, yeah, but you know what? All of this has already happened, so it's not really fiction. So, like, what else are you bringing? And those are the times that we live in, right? That all of these crazy, crazy things, we've already lived through them. And even as a fiction writer, you have to really struggle to come up with something that's so over the top that we have not gone through yet.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Omar. No, I think I'm good. It's always a pleasure to share stage with you.
Thank
We've
you.
done this a couple of times before, and it's always been very entertaining, I'd say. We come up with good
Always
questions
fun.
and good questions and some great answers.
Always fun with Safinah, Danish, Elahi.
So, Umar, why is Wajahat in Iowa?
The Iowa writing program has a lot to do with that.
Like out of all the places, I think I see like why you've placed him there.
Two reasons. Actually, it's funny because, yes, at that time, I think there was some talk about the Iowa. So, the University of Iowa has a very famous writers' retreat, which Safina has been to, which is basically that you do nothing but
Nothing but just eat.
have a, and of course, Iowa is the first caucus in presidential elections, right? So it's a key state. It's where whenever you have a presidential election cycle in the US, it's where all the candidates have their first run in public. So those two things just, it was a perfect
And
combination.
also, Umar, I feel that, a reader can probably read it as any novel, right? But for you to know the insides of how the political system works, how the party works, how the PR for them works, what made you sort of take that leap into politics, like Taha asked, and what was your research like? Because you don't really get the inside story from anyone, really, right? Um, and I noticed that there's quite detail into it in the story.
So I've been a political junkie of US elections for years, so I've sort of studied and analyzed, I think, every presidential election since 1956 or something. And I can give you random details which no one else will be interested in. And I just think that it's when you kind of, as a writer, when you, if you're able to walk through this very arcane political system, because it's not an easy political system to understand. There's primaries and it goes on for a year and all of that. So it's quite fascinating. And as a writer, there's a lot of stuff that you can play with. To kind of mold it into a narrative, to mold it into a story. One of my biggest things, so Liberty Books, who's published the book, was very keen to get the book out by November 5th, which was US election day. And I was just hoping कि Kamala Harris ना जीत जाए, वरना sales down हो जाएंगी. But, thanks to all those sort of middle America voters who put rupees in my pocket thanks to Trump's re-election.
I told you this couldn't have been a coincidence.
Exactly.
This was planned in advance.
No, it's incredible because your characters are, I suppose characters have to be relatable, but these are people we know almost. So there's a character by the name of Ron Diamond who is very much like a Trump like figure. I don't want to say that he is Trump, only fictitious, but. And then you have someone named Javed Afridi who is somewhat like Imran. Are these characters entirely like them? Did you intend for them to be entirely like these figures, or do you think people should read them as composites? What do you think? Like,
Look, I think, the one thing I've learned in these years of writing is that whatever you intend for a character to be like, people will interpret that character in their own way.
exactly.
So, so what I've kind of started doing is that, yeah, you take a character as a sketch, as a baseline, and then you breathe life into it, but actually it's the readers who have their own take on it. They have a totally different take. And I'm sure, both of you have written books. You must have had discussions where people have come up with some representation of your character where you're like, really? I actually never thought of that.
That's the best part.
Yeah.
No, there's always a reader bias and a writer bias
Exactly,
also.
yeah.
We all I think know about the fact that whenever you're approaching a piece of text, it's always your own biases that come on board as well.
So, as per my research, you studied at the University of Kent in Canterbury, and I believe you were at LSE for a while, right? The best part about your book, the best part about your book is that even though you're talking about the perspective of a student in the US, you get it right. It's spot on. The language, the tone. How did you capture that American milieu so well? Because
I had to work very hard with my son not to sound like an old man, because and actually as a writer, it's it's getting difficult, right? Because it's a totally new age, and phrases that you thought were like hip 5 years ago are like, your kids stare at you and say, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Like, so you have to really kind of
yeah,
work
but
with people of a younger
you
generation.
manage very well, even with Ron Diamond's character. The way he speaks sounds like someone his age would speak, and then even the younger characters.
And I think both of us, I mean, we've already had a conversation before the session as well. So both of us thought that you got the Americanness absolutely correct.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Because, if, and I also Googled where you had studied, because I was like, how has he figured out that experience so in such an authentic manner? Because there is a completely different sort of college life if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, and many things are different, but I think you get that very right. And that's, I think, one of the things that kind of stood out, the Americanness of the text.
But at the same time, one can even read this as an immigrant novel. So many of you will be familiar with Reluctant Fundamentalists by Mohsin Hamid. You start like that, but you go in an entirely different direction. Do you see this as an immigrant novel? Do you see this as something?
Yeah, I because the main protagonist Vaj or Wajahat is this kid who has an American dream, right? And he's someone who came as a student over there. He's someone who obviously, because of the globalized world that we live in, has been influenced by popular culture and TV and all of that. So when he arrives in the US, he's already very familiar with it, and then when he's there, he falls in love with the place. And I think this is an experience that perhaps many people have had, but the caveat is that the US, as we see it now, and again, we've seen this with the events of November 5th, is now a very different place, right? I was having this chat with some friends who had studied in the US when they were in college, and now their children have gone there. And they were saying that, and even though their children had gone to the same university that they had attended, they said it's a very different experience because it's a changed country. And so part of the effort of the book is to capture the fact that there are still people who have this kind of immigrant dream, right? So it is very much an immigrant novel, but the difference is that now they are navigating a very different space. This is not the America of the 1990s or the 1970s. This is the America of the 21st century, and there's some things that have changed quite a bit.
And I think you largely stay away from all the cliches as well, because I think there was a time where a lot of Pakistani writers were writing about things that were very sort of Pakistani or South Asian. And I think in this novel, you've largely stayed away, from that identity crisis. Yes, it's an American dream, but you can still see in little bits that it's a person who is in America, but it's not, there are no bougainvillas and there's no terrorism and like all the
ये
cliches.
बोगनविला बड़े बदनाम हो गए
और
हैं.
mangoes
कुछ ज़्यादा ही.
mangoes भी बड़े बदनाम हुए हैं. So if I can just go ahead, which character did you find the most difficult to write? Because there's two storylines going in parallel. Which was the toughest sort of to get down on paper? Which one did you think you struggled with the most because you were separated and most away from it?
I think the main protagonist, Waj, because he's someone who's younger. Because as you said, he studied in America. I didn't. So to get, and because he's the main character, it's very important to get his tone and his voice absolutely correct. So I think he's the one that I struggled with, and also as a result, the one that I worked the hardest on. The others are easier because you can start with, whether it's Ron Diamond or whether it's Javed Afridi, you can start with caricatures and then you can sort of add things on to them. And the others, like Wajahat's father, who is a Pakistani expat who's returned to Pakistan, and like many people, is kind of working in the political space in Pakistan, trying to improve things. So those are all easier, but Wajahat was the difficult one, the challenging one, I should say.
Was it because you chose the first person voice for him? Was that why? Were you
I
accepting the challenge purely
I mean,
because?
I think the last few books I've written, I just seem to be more comfortable in writing in the first person. It's just become. In fact, I just started my next book, and I was having this debate, कि first person में लिखें या ना लिखें. तो वो it's that's I think just becoming habit because it seems it's easier to me. Although they say craft wise
Yeah,
it's more
yeah.
difficult,
That's
but
what
I
I was
find
gonna
it
get
easier.
at. That because the first person voice, there's so many voices inside the mind of the writer. It's actually more difficult to get it right. But it seems to be that
आदत की बात हो जाती है. I think it's
I think you're maybe more familiar with the way of writing now.
You've also captured the reality of Muslims in the West quite well, not just from a Pakistani Muslim perspective, but even the Indian Muslim perspective. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, this is increasingly a difficult question, right? That Muslims in most of their own home countries are often trying to move away. I was, again, talking to a college counselor over here, and she said that the number of children who are coming to her, when she discusses, कि अच्छा कहाँ जाना चाहते हो, क्या पढ़ना, they say कि we just want to get out. Right, so it's an unfortunate reality of our times, and I'm sure हम पाकिस्तान का हवाला दे रहे हैं, but as you said, it's equally difficult for Indian Muslims. It's equally difficult for Palestinians, or Lebanese or whomever. But at the same time, the sort of shining West that seemed so attractive to an earlier generation. It was sort of the place where all problems would be solved, and as long as you worked hard, you could make a life for yourself. But that's not the case anymore, right? Because there are all these barriers, racism, prejudice, the West itself closing its own doors and looking more inward, more isolationist. So it's a conundrum that it's kind of almost between the frying pan and the fire for many Muslim communities. कि अपने मुल्क रहें तो वहाँ what future is there for them, or if they take this step to kind of migrate to the West, what future is there for them over there?
The question of morality is very interesting in the novel because each of them are making certain sacrifices to their own morality, whether it's Wajahat in the US or his father who was dealing with Javed Afridi in Pakistan. So, would you like to comment on
Siyasat,
siyasat,
the first victim of siyasat is morality, right?
morality?
So anyone, I think, who enters that space anywhere in the world will have this will at some point in their lives have to go through this conundrum, that where do you sacrifice your ideals for what you perceive to be a greater good.
Also, I mean that you've drawn two
तुमने
parallels,
भी
right?
पूरी किताब पढ़ ली, उसने भी पढ़ ली. बड़े तेज पढ़ते हो.
We're
So,
fast readers.
so drawing a parallel between politics in Pakistan and politics in the US, did you think about putting in our neighboring country as well? Because wahan bhi popular leader hai. It's an interesting, premise ke the father is working for, a person in our country, and then Vaj is working in the US. Did you mean for it to be a contrast? What were your thoughts behind it to have these two parallel sort of storylines in politics, in popular leaders? What was the thought behind it?
Yeah, it was pretty deliberate because the point was to see जो हमारे टाइम्स में ये एक लहर आई है पॉपुलिज्म की, डेमागॉग्स की अराउंड द वर्ल्ड, राइट? Developed countries maybe, and developing countries maybe. You mentioned India, equally you can mention Hungary, or wherever else. And the whole point was to see that through the prism of one family, the story of one family, of how they kind of navigate these same trends. One half, the son is seeing in that in the US, and the father is seeing it and having to question his idealism and his moral code for the sake of entering politics in Pakistan. So
And also how the political engine works, right?
how
So
the political
so
engine works.
in
Absolutely.
Pakistan there was a certain sort of, he was brought in, Vaj's father was brought in as a consultant. There it was a completely different story. Everybody was awestruck by the fact that this Ron Diamond person is going to be running for office. So I understand, the contrast, and I was just interested that, in other countries, if the same is happening, were you able to sort of draw upon any of that in your story, or did you largely stay within Pakistan and the
So
US?
I think I largely stayed within these two because I think they were the most interesting thing. It's an interesting point, to have seen whether one could have included an angle on India. But I think again that's something, like I said, the American political system is something I'm very familiar with. So it would have taken a lot more research and again sort of interpretation, right? Because वहाँ लोग कहते जी आपको क्या पता, that sort of thing. So I think it just worked more. I was more comfortable working within these two frameworks.
So if you think about it realistically, populism is here to stay. We can't do anything about it in some way or the other. It's here. Do you see a solution to it, or rather, as you were writing this book, did you come across something that maybe some kind of an antidote? Not that as you should act like a political pundit and say, okay, this is how it happens, but did you perhaps, as you climbed into the skin of someone like Ron Diamond or someone like Javed Afridi, understand where they were coming from to some extent, and could you like?
वो बेचारी कामला हैरिस एंटीडोट ढूंढते ढूंढते खुद डूब गई, तो हम क्या करेंगे? um, it's interesting because if you look at it in a historical perspective, the current decade or the last few years is the only time really that it's comparable to is the 1930s, just before World War II, where you had this rise of totalitarian states, Spain, Italy, Germany, etc., around the world. And obviously, that ultimately led to a cataclysm of a world war. So, how we are going to get past this thing, or whether it's here to stay, I think इसके dynamics कुछ ऐसे हैं कि it can't become the norm because populism always has to keep pushing against some barriers. It has to find an external enemy, right? कि वो हमारे दुश्मन हैं, immigrants हैं या फलाने हैं, whatever. And so it's something that has to be kept on the boil, right? So the real question is that what will happen that will make the sort of the ketli boil over? कि वो, will we have to go through a cataclysm of that level, as we saw in the 30s, or will there be sort of local release points,
Or
or what?
whatever's happening in Bangladesh as well,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
is it a
yeah. A
revolution that
revolutionary, a
we're looking at?
pre-revolutionary. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's something.
So you always surprise us with your work. When I read The Party Worker, I did not expect the fix, and that was terrific. Are you going to surprise us some more? Because this was also a pleasant surprise, the election. What's next?
I was half expecting an intelligence agency to show up within the text. I was like, oh, who's gonna?
Next is serial killers.
Interesting.
It's my new fascination. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि serial
Like
killers
a
जो
murder
हैं वो
mystery or
किताबें
something.
काफी बेच सकते हैं.
I do remember actually. I think it was at the Arts Council that we were sitting, and you said that you had been sort of writing a character which is really dark. And we spoke about it because obviously the audience is different. I want you to talk about it a little bit. When you're writing a character, you're also embodying their characteristics, largely because and especially when it's first person narrative, it's almost like you are the character. So, with your next book or with this work as well, which character did you A, like identify with, or and B, what left an impact on you?
I didn't identify with any of the characters. But I think for a writer that's important because uski wajah ye hoti hai कि I think that kind of, if you get into this trap of identifying with one of your own characters, you kind of subconsciously want to show that character in a better light, right? Whereas if you are agnostic about the character, yes, it's difficult. It's more difficult to write, absolutely. And well, we talk about serial killers, but even in this book, in the election, there is an absence of morality, as Taha pointed out, to most of the main characters, right? And that's difficult for me to write because I haven't worked in politics. I don't know. I if I could divorce myself from my own moral code to that extent. Uh, so it's even that's difficult, right? It's challenging to think कि अच्छा, but अगर एक आदमी इस तरह होगा तो वो क्या किस तरह सोचेगा, अगर उसने अमेरिका का प्रेसिडेंट बनना है या पाकिस्तान का प्राइम मिनिस्टर बनना है तो the deals that he makes or she makes, and how okay they are with that. That's the question, right?
No, I actually completely agree because I feel like you're no longer defending a character then. When you've taken a step away from and being agnostic about it, then you're no longer saying, okay, no, this is a good guy, or like his intentions are right. But that's for the reader to understand that whether are they right or not, and that's where kind of your own biases come in. So
Totally.
So this is your sixth book. How do you see your writing trajectory going so far? In what ways do you think you've evolved as a writer?
All about the sales. All about the sales.
In
जब
that
तक
case,
किताबें बिकती रहें तो बंदा चलता है, नहीं बिके तो दुकान बंद कर दो.
but I think Umar's a
you
very
guys,
brave writer as
brave
well. I
writer,
think
yeah.
he's experimented, and a lot of writers are unable to sort of.
ये क्या? अच्छा. ये चलाऊं. इसमें तो आवाज नहीं आ रही. अभी आ रही है. अभी आ गई.
Okay.
Interesting.
That's like a RoboCop action just went on. So I
Seen
mean,
from your novels.
I was just praising you on the fact that a lot of writers sort of stick to a genre because they get comfortable. But I think you've been very brave with your writing, and you've kind of stepped out of your comfort zone many times. It's not just thrillers, or with Fix you did that. With this is political, satire. This is also, I feel like, out of the usual Umar Shahid Hamid novel that we read. And I think it's
I
fantastic.
think with every book, even with The Prisoner, it was you're a cop basically, but you didn't engage in any rehabilitative work. That this is what the police is like. This is what we are, and there was a lot of criticism of what was going on. And in every book, with The Spinner's Tale, every book, there's been some form of duns. Let's put it like that. I was just wondering, would you ever consider sending a signed copy to Trump and Imran Khan?
Absolutely. Can you imagine the sales I can do on the back of that? And if Trump endorses it like he endorsed that Bible, तो वो तो फिर आयोवा और ये वायोमिंग शायोमिंग में तो हर आदमी खरीद रहा होगा.
एक कॉपी तो बनती है आयोवा
हाँ,
में. वहां पे अभी
बिल्कुल.
I'm sending an email and
Done.
placing one copy there.
Done.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Umar.
you so much. I think we
you,
should
Taha.
open it up for
Yeah,
everybody
for
to ask
questions.
questions. Any thoughts?
यार एक माइक दे दें. अच्छा चले उनकी चला जाए.
I've not read the book. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I've not read the book yet, but that's just to say yet. It soon will be read. So I can't ask you a question about the book, Umar. But one comment first and then the question. I think you are trying to be more mercenary than you really are. But that's just a comment.
मैं बिल्कुल mercenary हूँ.
अच्छा, और जो सवाल है वो ये कि do you think that if it was not Trump versus Harris, if it was Trump, since you are so good about American elections, do you think a white male who had been in the running 2 years ago, could he have defeated Trump?
That's a very interesting question. And I think obviously जो Democratic Party में soul searching हो रही है उसमें this is a major question that they're asking. I feel that he would have still won because the kind of level of resentment and the level of dissatisfaction was huge if you look at President Biden's poll numbers and all. But ये जरूर है कि perhaps the margin, so for instance, you know, everyone was talking about these 7 swing states or whatever, और वो उन्होंने कहा जी बड़ा क्लोज होगा, ट्रम्प ने कहा मैं सारी ले जाता हूँ, यू नो, पैक ही कर देता हूँ मैं. सो perhaps it could have been a case that, you know, वहां से 7 के बजाय वो कोई 3 ले लेता या something like that. But I think that the sort of dissatisfaction and disconnect from a number of constituencies was so great that I think he would have won. And I think, you know, it's a commentary on social media and the way that we receive news and all, right? कि हम सारे जो हैं वो वही चीज पढ़ेंगे जो algorithm हमें देगा, which will be in line with our opinions, right? So we will never really read. Well, I don't know about Safinah because तुम आयोवा गई थी, तुम Trump voter type लगती हो. So, but the rest of us won't ever read that sort of stuff, right? लेकिन you know, so हमें लगेगा कि नहीं यार वो तो कमाल है, वो तो जीत जाएगी, क्या कौन पागल ही होगा जो उसके लिए वोट करेगा ट्रम्प के लिए. But you know, that's not the truth, right? It's a very diverse mosaic.
अच्छा उमर, मैं ये देख रहा था कि मैंने आपकी पहले वाली बुक्स को पढ़ा.
डॉग छोड़ दें, आप पढ़ते तो हैं नहीं.
अच्छा लिसन, नहीं, दैट्स व्हाई आई एम अ डॉक्टर, यू नो, जस्ट रीड. तो मैं ये कह रहा था कि आपका यू नो आपकी हर जो बुक है वो उसकी यू नो इट्स अ होल. जैसे कुछ ऑथर्स होते हैं वो मिस्ट्री नॉवेल्स लिखते हैं, कोई जो है वो हिस्ट्री लिखते हैं, कोई ऑटोबायोग्राफीज लिखते हैं. But you switch so much. I mean, you know, that's pretty difficult to do. So I just want to ask, maybe do you have a favorite theme, or you go with? I mean, what makes you decide what to write? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, how do you switch?
Doc, you know, again, ताहा and Safina भी यही सवाल पूछ रहे थे. अगर मैं सिर्फ एक थीम पर लिखता तो I think I would have gotten bored by now. You know, बहुत से लोग हैं, like you say, they're internationally renowned authors.
What I mean was that you are perfectly right. I just want to add it up. But how do you decide a topic? I mean, how do you switch? I mean, do you switch before reason?
Whatever catches my interest. मैंने कहा इस वाली किताब की मैंने आपको कहानी सुनाई ना कि it started with this press photo call between these two leaders. Similarly, ये जो मैं अगली अब मैंने किताब शुरू की है तो I was reading some material on जावेद इकबाल, जो कि लाहौर में एक बड़ा मशहूर सीरियल किलर था, बल्कि the most prolific serial killer in history. So it's just whatever catches, you know, जो चीज जहन में अटक जाती है. या बिल्कुल सर आ रही है. वो हर इलेक्शन में क्राइम होता है यार, कमाल है पूरी दुनिया में.
अच्छे तरीके से प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं कि हमें अब जो जेंडर डिस्पैरिटी है वो भी नजर नहीं आती. हमें लगता है कि कमला को थोड़ा हाथ जाना चाहिए. एंड तमाम जो भी लिबरल कैंप है वो पूरा बैठ चुका है. राइट जो है वो अपने क्रूज पे सिविल लिबर्टीज के हमने अगेंस्ट हो गए. हम कहते हैं कि बंद कर दोगे सारा जो भी कुछ ये फिनोमेना हो रहा है. पहले वो बरादरी में वोट बहुत इजी था, तो सारे कुछ चार्ज है. क्या रीजन है कि लिबरल कैंप को क्या हो गया है कि राव भाई क्या एल्गोरिथम इतना कुछ मतलब करना है कि हम पहुंच ही नहीं मतलब पा रहे. हम अपने तमाम लिबर्टी के सारे आइडियाज को
देखिए, ये आपका बड़ा अच्छा सवाल है और ये मेरे ख्याल से जो भी प्रोग्रेसिव पार्टीज है ना पूरी दुनिया में, चाहे वो अमेरिका में हो, चाहे वो यूके में हो, चाहे वो इंडिया में हो, चाहे कहीं भी हो, वो इस सवाल मतलब स्ट्रगल कर रही हैं इस सवाल का जवाब देने में, राइट? बिकॉज आप इंडिया में देख लें तो कांग्रेस पार्टी की मत मारी गई है. एंड आई थिंक उसमें जो चीज जो अगेन ये मेरा जाती ओपिनियन है कि जो उस प्रोग्रेसिव मैट्रिक्स में जो कॉन्ट्रडिक्शंस आ गई हैं ना वो बहुत ज्यादा आ गई. मसलन यू नो अगेन टू टेक एन एग्जांपल, ये जो अभी इलेक्शन हुई है अमेरिका में, बिल्कुल आपकी बात सही कि जी प्रोग्रेसिव जो हैं ऑन द वन हैंड आप कहते हैं कि जी जेंडर भी वो नहीं हो, जेंडर फ्लूइडिटी भी कर दें, फलाना कर दें, शी हर हो, दे देम हो, यू नो इतना ज्यादा आप वो करें. बट ऑन द अदर हैंड जब सवाल उठता है पैलेस्टाइन का या गाजा का, उस पर आप चुप हो जाते हो. यू नो इट्स इंटरेस्टिंग. अगर आप ये मैं यूट्यूब पर ना अक्सर ये जो लेट नाइट शोज होते हैं ना, जिस तरह लाइक स्टीवन कोलबेर, या ये जो लेट नाइट कॉमिक्स होते हैं अमेरिका में, जो अक्सर बहुत से प्रोग्रेसिव और लिबरल कॉजेज वो कर रहे होते हैं, और वो राइट विंग को हमेशा तंज या उनका मजाक उड़ा रहे होते हैं. बट इंटरेस्टिंगली इनफ, मेरे ख्याल से सिर्फ एक आधा कोई इस तरह का लेट नाइट शो होस्ट होगा जिसने पैलेस्टाइन और जो इजराइल की वो वहां रही है एक्शन, उस पर क्रिटिसाइज किया. सो जब आप एज अ प्रोग्रेसिव, अब जब आप देखते हो कि यार मतलब, या एज अ वोटर, नॉट प्रोग्रेसिव भी नहीं कहना चाहिए, कि यार ऑन द वन हैंड हम कहते हैं कि जी ये भी होना चाहिए, वो भी होना चाहिए, या फलाना और भी आज़ादी होनी चाहिए, लेकिन एज लॉन्ग एज वो ऐसी चीज पर आप बात ना करें जिसमें मतलब यहाँ वेव्स क्रिएट हों, राइट? तो सो इट्स हिपोक्रेसी, राइट? बिल्कुल. तो सो इसलिए अच्छा, जो दूसरी साइड है ना, आप उनको पसंद ना करें, लेकिन वो उनके कॉन्सेप्ट बड़े क्लियर हैं. दे वेरी मतलब उनकी, यू मे डिसलाइक देम, दे मे बी मेनी थिंग्स टू डिसलाइक अबाउट द राइट, कि वो रेसिस्ट हैं, वो तंग नजरिए की सोच रखते हैं, लेकिन उनके कॉन्सेप्ट्स क्लियर हैं, और इसलिए उनके जो वोटर है ना, वो कहते हैं यार हमारे जो भी हमारे कैंडिडेट हैं उनके कॉन्सेप्ट्स क्लियर है ना, वो वही जबान बोल रहे हैं, वो वही कह रहे हैं जो हम सुनना चाहते हैं, और वो करेंगे भी वही. ये नहीं है कि जिस तरह जो प्रोग्रेसिव विंग है दुनिया में, वो कहता एक चीज है, करता दूसरी चीज है.
They know what to sell also.
They know what to sell. Yeah, they know what to sell.
एडमिशन जो प्रोग्रेसिव ने अपने पास रखती है, अब वो ट्रम्प से सारी लिबरल लिबर्टीज रहेगी. तो अब ये तो एडमिशन जो उस पहाड़ पे ना खड़ा हो गया, मेरा लिबरल प्रोग्रेसिव पे, फलस्तीन पे तुमने नहीं बोला, आपका अब चमना भारत वो हार जाना चाहिए. इमेजिन करें आप, तो क्या हम भी एडमिशन ज्यादा एडमिशन होगा, वो राइट वाले ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस.
लेकिन अब वही वाली बात ना, कि जो ये जो बात हो भी रही है अभी, कि जी वो ये कहते हैं, ये एक अगेन पॉइंट व्यू, कि जी आप लोग जो डेमोक्रेट्स हैं वो तो इस इशू पर झूठ बोल रहे हैं ना, हमें ये कहते हैं कि जी हमारे लिए वोट करो वरना वो. तो अब हम, या तो उन्होंने वोट किया नहीं, वो घर बैठे रहे, या फिर जिन्होंने किया उन्होंने कहा जो भी है ये जो बोलेगा वो करेगा. अब एक जो जो बहुत बड़ा एक इशू उसमें था, वो यही था ना कि मिशिगन, जहां अरब अमेरिकन पॉपुलेशन बहुत ज्यादा है, और जो कि एक स्विंग स्टेट थी इस इलेक्शन में, उसमें जो डेमोक्रेट्स थे वो इतने परेशान थे कि यार वहां प्रोटेस्ट हो जाएंगे, ये हो जाएंगे, वो गए ही नहीं. और ट्रंप जो था, वो मेरे ख्याल से आखिरी इलेक्शन के आखिरी 5 या 6 दिनों में वो वहां चला गया, और डियरबॉर्न एक शहर है जहां सबसे ज्यादा अरब अमेरिकन पॉपुलेशन की कॉन्सेंट्रेशन, वो वहां गया. हालांकि टेक्निकली स्पीकिंग वो सारे उसके मुखालिफ वोटर हैं. उसने कहा यार ऐसी कौन सी बड़ी बात है, चला जाता हूँ, चाय पी लेता हूँ, कॉफी पी लो, हाँ हाँ शांत रहो, कुछ कर लेंगे कुछ ना कुछ. और वहां का जो मेयर था उसने कहा जी हम तो आपका बड़ा वो करते हैं कि आप आए तो सही. सो ये भी तो एक मसला है ना इसमें. जी 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 बिल्कुल.
लिबरल का जो क्राइसिस है इस वक्त, वो एक्चुअली लगता है कि एक इम्प्लोजन है, जो आपने जैसे कॉन्ट्रडिक्शंस की बात की है, और उसके साथ अगर आप कैपिटलिज्म का जो फेलियर है इन एड्रेसिंग द इश्यूज, मुझे लगता है ये दोनों जो है, जो एक्चुअली पॉपुलिज्म इज अ रिएक्शन
यस
टू दिस. इट्स नॉट दैट ये कुछ अलग से कोई चीज़ हुई है. इट्स प्रोबेबली the cynicism of the common man on the street, which has taken the form of populism, and that's what we're seeing. And मुझे ये लगता है कि people will have to take it more seriously. And actually I'm interested कि आप बताएं कि ये trajectories जो चल रही हैं, if you look at the populism, and then of course nationalism, and ये सब चल रहा है, फिर AI भी, टेक्नोलॉजी भी आ गई बीच में, environment की एक dimensions है. Do you see any point of convergence, or where do you think, as a thinker, as a writer, do you see where it's going, and how would you like to project it?
आपकी बात बिल्कुल सही है, you're absolutely right. and again अगर आप इसका हिस्टोरिकल व्यू लेंगे तो 1930s में भी जो नेशनलिज्म या पॉपुलिज्म का राइज हुआ, वो 1920s की जो एक्सेसेस थी कैपिटलिज्म की, उसकी रिएक्शन में हुआ. मसला जो मैं देखता हूं जो अब है ना, वो ये है कि अब हम सारे जो हैं ग्लोबली, वो जो रोड मैप था, वी हैव ड्रिवन ऑफ द रोड मैप. सो जहां और एंड दिस इज द सेम, आई कीप सेइंग दिस, पाकिस्तान के लिए भी उतना ही वैलिड है, अमेरिका के लिए भी उतना ही वैलिड है. कि जो हम पहले कहते थे कि जी नहीं जी वो फलां चीज़ जो है ना वो इसलिए नहीं होती क्योंकि पहले कभी नहीं हुई है, देखिए आप हिस्टोरिकली देख लें तो यहाँ कभी ऐसा नहीं हुआ या फलाना नहीं हुआ, इलेक्शन में फ्रॉड नहीं हुआ और वट एवर एल्स XYZ, अमेरिका में नहीं हुआ, यहाँ नहीं. Now, if you just take the headlines of the last maybe 3-4 years around the world, जो चीज का आप कभी तसव्वुर भी नहीं कर सकते थे कि होगा वो हो चुका है. किसी को ये तसव्वुर ही नहीं था कि जनवरी 6 में लोग जो हैं वो US कैपिटल में घुस जाएंगे, बट हुआ, राइट. सिमिलरली मतलब बहुत से आप हमारी सियासत से एग्जांपल देख लें कि किसी को ये तसव्वुर नहीं था जो चीज़ें अब हम ये जो हमारे नाइटली न्यूज़ टॉक शोज होते हैं, जिन चीज़ों का अब ओपनली जिन चीज़ों पर बात हो रही है, वो शायद मे बी अगर आप और मैं ये डिस्कशन आज से 5-6 साल पहले करते हैं, हम कहते हैं यार ऐसा तो हो ही नहीं सकता, इट्स नॉट पॉसिबल कि इस तरह हो. सो जो उसमें खतरा है यही है कि वो अब हम रोड मैप के बगैर नेविगेट कर रहे हैं, सो वो गाड़ी जो है वो कहीं भी जा सकती है.
Something actually. Populism is definitely a reaction, जैसे आपने बोला. मगर जो स्कैरी बात है वो ये है कि एक साहब है कार्ल मार्क्स जिन्होंने रिलीजन को बोला था कि इट्स ओपियम ऑफ द मासेस, राइट. मुझे लगता है कि पॉपुलिज्म अब इट फीड्स ऑफ पीपल्स वीकनेसेस. वो बोलते हैं ये सब गलत कर रहे हैं ना, आप हमारे पास आए और हम इनको, चाहे आप इमिग्रेशन समझे, इनको बाहर निकालते हैं, चाहे आप इंडिया में देखें, इसमें हम नेशनलिस्टिक जो एजेंडा है, that has become very scary now. I think it's almost like opium now that, okay, we're here to save you.
But I think what is happening is कि जो rationality है, जो हम समझते हैं कि rationality is gone out of the door, out of the window. Populism मेरा ख्याल वो ऐसा है नहीं. जो common man or woman on the street है ना, उसकी अपनी एक rationality है, and we're seeing a play of that actually. Which is, but मुझे लगता है कि, maybe Pakistan is a very different example because I think जो हमारे issues हुए हैं, because लगता है कि people are dead, ये जो भी हो रहा है अभी तो लगता है कि kind of there is no, whereas in the rest of the world we're seeing reaction, common people are coming out and expressing themselves. यहाँ तो लगता है कुछ भी हो जाए, we have 26th ये जो amendment है, ये जो, I mean like fundamentally things are changing, but मुझे लगता है कि कुछ हमारा case अलग ही है. But मेरा point यही है कि actually it's another kind of rationalism because वो क्या किसी ने कहा है ना कि all the progress in the world depends on the unreasonable man or woman. And I think that's what it is. It's going to create new rationalities. It's going to create new realities. And we are just,
I think
spectators.
it boils down to this idea. 2016 ka word of the year tha post-truth. So we're at this point where the truth is something that we make up, something very subjective.
Yeah,
something that
absolutely.
so eventually, जिस तरह से rationality की आप बात कर रही हैं, people also have their own notion of what is right and what is wrong. And you can't contest it for some reason.
I have two comments, if you
जी
allow
जी
me.
जी
Take that.
Actually, one of the major reasons why Trump won is because of Joe Biden's performance. वो इतना खतरनाक था और इतना desperate था, people had become. जहाँ तक इनका सवाल था कि भाई किस तरीके से हम फ्यूचर को देख रहे हैं, तो I have a feeling after a lot of research कि अगर ये कैपिटलिज्म बिल्कुल वो हो गया है, अगर ये ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक नहीं होता, वर्ल्ड के लीडर्स जो हैं, दोज हु मीन यूरोप हुआ, चाइना हुआ, आपका यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स हुआ, जब तक ये कैपिटलिज्म को ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक नहीं बनाएंगे कि जो लोग बिल्कुल पिसे हुए हैं उनके लिए ये कुछ नहीं करेंगे, तो वी विल बी रोमिंग इन डार्क एज वी हैव बीन डूइंग सिंस क्वाइट सम टाइम. This is my comment here.
लेकिन सर वो ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक कौन सियासतदान करेगा?
I suppose we should wrap up. Thank you so much, Umar, and good
Thank
luck for
you.
your serial killer novel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
तुम दोनों बहुत तेज पढ़ते हो.
It's a good book. I agree that
It was fast paced.